Robots Radio presents...
Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. We are back with another special bonus episode. Today we are reviving our My Favorite Movie series. This is the series where we talk to owners, CEOs of distilleries, and we talk to them about their product, maybe give us a little bit of a rundown on their lineup, and then we talk about their favorite film. And we are joined today by one of the coolest people we've talked to so far on the podcast, Marko Karakasevic. He is the master distiller and CEO at Charbay Distillery in California. We are so excited to have him on the podcast. Marko, how are you today?
Bob, I'm good, man. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I'm already a big fan of you because you have this nice Serbian last name. And Brad and I are here in Ohio, and like the immigrant population in Ohio historically was Eastern European. So like I grew up, my mom's Hungarian. We grew up eating the good Eastern European food. And I saw Karakasevic and I was like, them's my people over there at Charbay.
And you said it totally right. You know, that's refreshing. That's part of the reason why we named Charbay, the distillery Charbay, because Karakasevic just doesn't fit on the label.
No, not very well. It
doesn't quite roll off the tongue.
Yeah, if someone brutalizes the word Charbay, I don't care. It's not my damn last name,
Right, exactly.
Works out better that way.
Marko, can you walk us through how the Karakasevic family ended up in California? How did this distillery get started?
My family's been distilling since 1751 back in Serbia, and my dad's 12th generation master distiller. So it's usually parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and we had a very successful little distillery complex in my family in Serbia up to the 60s until Tito came in and nationalized all the private businesses in Serbia or Yugoslavia at the time. And so my dad said, well, I'm left with a hectare on the other side of the river. Not a whole lot of opportunity going on here. So I'm going to move to America. And so my dad went to Germany and studied in Geisenheim for enology, became a certified enologist, and then went into Canada in the late 60s. And someone heard about him and imported him into Michigan to set up a winery in Traverse City. And then Dad got a job at a monster winery in California in the early 70s. They bought property on Spring Mountain in St. Helena in Napa Valley. And come 1983, my dad said, that's it. I'm done being a consultant winemaker. I want to start my own winery and distillery. And Charbay was started in 83.
Now, before we get into talking about Charbay itself and the distilling process, which is super interesting, I have to ask a question to the native Californian. Like, when your dad arrived in Napa, was it pre-Napa boom, or was he right in the midst of it as it was kind of taking off on the worldwide stage?
Oh, it was still the 70s, man. So,
yeah.
It wasn't all dressed up, and it was still I wouldn't say classic, but it was still, heavily focused on agriculture. There were more than just grapes, but wineries were starting to pop up.
Okay. I was just talking to Brad a couple weeks ago about that movie Bottle Shock that came out a few years ago, which was about, when Napa beat France on the world stage. And I didn't know, I don't know if you've seen the movie or not, but I didn't know how accurate it was to what the vibe was in Napa at that time, because it really just seemed like it was a bunch of mom and pop kind of down home wineries that happened to shock the world.
It was like a farm town, It was amazing growing up in Napa Valley, just watching the explosion of investment coming in. It's you would drive down Highway 29 or the Silverado Trail, and it seemed like every week they're like, whoa, there's another winery popping up, and there's a winery popping up, and there's a cave,
Yeah.
And Marko, growing up in such an area, did you always kind of have a sense that you would end up in the alcohol business, in one shape or form or another? Did it always seem like you were destined to be in this role?
Well, growing up in a distilling family, you do what you're told. Some of my earliest memories, I was born in Modesto, down in the Central Valley of California, wherein my dad was a winemaker down there for United Vintners. It's a monster winery. And then we moved up to Napa Valley, and there's pumps and trucks and tractors and grapes getting dumped and, things happening all over the place. And yeah, it was cool. And then the distillery popped up when I was 10. So my first job in our distillery was actually inside the still. I was sitting on a bucket, scrubbing the inside of the top of the still, GSP dripping on my head back in the day. And I was like, I'm cleaning this thing. I'm done. And, this voice from outside the still goes, "You're not done. Get back in there and finish it." And that's just the way it was.
So most of us were scrubbing bathtubs when we were kids. You were in the still, scrubbing out the still.
Yeah, we have a Charente cognac still from the Prulot family. The Prulot family in Cognac, France, has been building these for 400 years. It's an amazing still. And it's a 600-gallon load. So I don't really fit in the still anymore, fortunately. So, I come over to the still after school and go to work.
Well, and Marko, we've been looking into this Charbay brand, and what you guys do there is just spectacular. Normally with whiskey, you get your normal stages of malting and mashing, fermenting, distilling, and maturing. But you guys have kind of taken that and turned it on its head a little bit by brewing beer before you do anything else. And I just want you to talk to me more about that. Is that something that you had seen done elsewhere? Or where did you find the inspiration to do this?
Well, in high school, my dad taught me how to brew beer. So
you were pretty popular in high school, is what I'm hearing you say.
Hell yeah. And little by little, being in a distilling family, I'm learning what American whiskey distilleries did, because we never made whiskey back in the 80s because my dad's from Serbia and he wanted to make brandy, which is delicious too. And learning that, they're using 2-row malted barley and fermenting it and making a distiller's beer that's about 6-7% alcohol. And I'm looking at what I just did. I'm like, well, I just used 2-row malted barley. And I added hops to them too, but why can't I distill this and make whiskey out of it, And I said, "Hey, Dad, I've got this beer and it's 7% alcohol and 8% alcohol. And I can distill this and make whiskey, right?" And no, you cannot make whiskey out of that. That is not what everybody does. That's not, that's not what anybody does. You don't use that beer to distill and make whiskey. So that was the 80s. Jump into the 90s. We had the opportunity to grab 22,000 gallons of this delicious Czech-style Pilsner, a true lagered, delicious beer. And we distilled it, Dad and I, and turned it into Pilsner whiskey. And it was crazy, the flavor that came off the pipe, the distillate, the clear whiskey off the pipe. And so we put it in brand new American oak barrels because we had to have something that people could get a grip on and associate this with whiskey, because this was not tasting like any other whiskey I've ever tried in my life. I mean, yeah. It had a boatload of flavor. It was brilliantly clear, and it had a huge body and a long finish. It was just kind of like our style of making eau de vie. So we put it in barrel for 2 years. I was getting a little anxious around then, and found 2 barrels and pulled it out of the barrel. Like, oh, damn, it tastes good just like this, Dad. Let's just bottle this uncut, unfiltered, full barrel strength, because it's fantastic. And that was the first release of the Charbay Pilsner whiskey, release 1.
Well, you have been so kind as to send us 4 samples of whiskey to try, and I'd really like to kind of walk through them as we go through the rest of the conversation. So, Mr. Master Distiller, can you lead the way here on the 4 samples that you've sent to us?
Where do you want to start? Which one?
Oh, I really like the look of this doubled and twisted lot 2. Can we try this one?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Now, what can you tell us about this?
Well, doubled and twisted is an old liquor term for you're drinking the good stuff, because before distillers had hydrometers, they would distill their whiskey, right? Double distilled is better than single distilled.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Because when you distill the first time, that beer distills out and you collect the first part of the distillate. It's called heads. It's very flavorful, but you don't need all of the heads. So you make a cut and then you run into the hearts. It's the good, clean part of the run. And then later on in the run, you start tasting fusel oils, higher boiling point alcohols. You don't want all of those, but you want some of them. So that you as a distiller determine when to make a cut from hearts to tails. You take the hearts and you distill those again. And now you're concentrating the alcohol from, 35% to 75% at the start. And you're taking the sweet spot of the whole run as your finished product. So you're taking like the heart of the watermelon, and then you're taking the heart of the watermelon as the finished product. And that's double distilling basically. So when distillers were distilling and they were double distilling, that was really good. And then in the beginning, right, in the beginning of the second run, the distillate would twist, like super tight helix twist coming off the pipe. And the distillers knew that when you saw that special twist, that was the good stuff. And so that was the doubled and twisted.
Oh, interesting.
So for me to become a 13th generation master distiller in my family, I had to, the definition in my family is the ability to meet and exceed your instructor. And then my dad put the extra little bonus feature of, and release a product into the market that the family's never released before. So, I grew up making eau de vie, clear brandy, And so I said, well, okay, I'm going to focus on whiskey, and I'm going to focus on clear whiskey, and I'm going to make a whiskey in the form of an eau de vie. I'm going to use delicious beer, because when you distill, you concentrate flavors. And if you distill delicious, you concentrate delicious.
Yeah.
And so I sourced a double IPA beer. I double distilled it. I aged my clear whiskey in stainless steel for 4 years. And then I released it in 2009. And I told my dad, I'm like, hey, I'm selling the D&T. And so he looked at me and, well, congratulations, you're a goddamn master distiller. Let's drink, let's drink some smoked cigars. I'm like, hell yeah. And away we went. And we've been making these crazy hop flavored whiskeys and, single barrel releases and stuff for 22 years. And we wanted to have, now I finally had an inventory of barrels that, I wanted to release some that aren't, $300 a bottle.
Right.
And so we decided to make a blend. And this blend is straight malt whiskey that was aged in brand new oak for 4 years, Czech style Pilsner whiskey that was aged in new oak for 4 years, and a stout, Big Bear Black Stout from Bear Republic Brewery in Cloverdale, California. And that whiskey was aged for 8 years in used French oak that had Chardonnay in it. And so I took a blend. I made a 10-barrel blend of those three whiskeys and diluted it down to 90 proof. Something else that I'd never done before too, because I always bottled like 99 proof or 129 proof, and this was like straight old 90 proof. It's a guzzler. And so my wife Jenny and I we were talking. I was like, God, we need to come up with a name for this. It's like, what are we going to do? So we're like looking around, searching. And I said, well, hey, we own the rights we own Doubled and Twisted. Let's bring it back. And so this is the Doubled and Twisted. And are you drinking the lot number 1 or lot number 2?
So we're drinking lot 2. And I have to say, not to interrupt you on your roll here, but one of the things I love about your whiskeys, we've, I've tried all 4 of them before we hit record, because I always, I got to do my research, I love the way that the hop flavor is integrated into the whiskey. Brad and I have done beer barrel finished whiskeys before on the podcast, and, specifically a very large producer of Irish whiskey is famous for their beer barrel finished whiskeys right now.
Yeah.
And we really, really didn't like the IPA version of that expression.
Yeah.
And I have to say, when you're distilling the beer into the whiskey, the hops bring this really wonderful flavor to it. And especially on the finish, like, it tastes like a whiskey. And especially with this one, it has that really great malty, scotchy kind of nose to it. And the hops don't really show up until like on the back end for me, but they're so well integrated into everything that what we hated about the Jameson was like, it tasted like half whiskey, half beer, and those tastes were kind of divided on the palate. And in this, it's just so beautifully kind of married into everything.
Thank you. That's kind of talking like oranges and peacocks right there. It's an Irish whiskey, a tasty Irish whiskey finished in a barrel that had beer in it prior. It's a completely different product.
Absolutely.
It's a completely different style. And the top notes of the hops, not the bitter notes, because bitter flavors are bigger molecules than alcohol molecules and bigger than water molecules. So those bitter flavors do not transfer over in the distillation process. So they stay in the still and go down the drain.
Interesting.
So what you get are the delicious top notes, the green spice of the hops, and those are alcohol soluble, so those come along for the ride out of the still and into the pipe.
That makes a lot of sense because Brad and I are not huge IPA drinkers in general because of that increased bitterness on like the IBUs. And I'm not getting that bitterness here at all. Like,
I get that all the time. People are like, God, I hate. Yeah, they're like, people are like, I hate IPA. I'm like, well, that's fine, but this isn't IPA; it's whiskey, okay?
Right.
So don't worry about it. You're not gonna have those bitter flavors coming out from the hops because they physically can't transfer over.
Well, speaking of hop flavor, can you walk us through this second sample that we have, which is the hop flavored whiskey? S.
That stands for stout. And when we first started making hop-flavored whiskeys, and hop-flavored whiskey is not my term. This is the TTB that put me into that term. Whenever someone thinks of hop-flavored, it seems like it's going to be like artificial flavor, or it's going to be just like straight up in your face, blow up. This is what you're going to taste and stuff. But there are exceptions to the rule, and I believe that we are one of them. So when we started making hop-flavored whiskeys, we were using a Czech style Pilsner. And then I started making fresh picked fruit flavored vodkas when there was like Absolute Citron and Stoli Orange on the market. And there was no ballistic explosion of rows and rows and rows of vodkas on the market. So it started catching up, though. The other people started catching on to vodkas and flavored vodkas and stuff. And I said, man, I got to get back in the distillery and start making more whiskey. And so then I was thinking one night, because I run 24 hours a day when I'm distilling. So I'm up in the middle of the night and stuff and just waiting for cuts, thinking, God, I do love the Big Bear Black Stout. I mean, it is tasty. And it's a huge contrast between the stout and the IPA beer. So I texted my buddies at the brewery. I'm like, hey, can I get a tanker of your Big Bear Black Stout, please, next time? And they said, sure, we're actually making that in a couple of weeks. I'm like, oh, perfect, man.
Yeah.
Then we got the tanker. We distilled it. I distilled it and barrel aged it in French oak that had Chardonnay in it prior to that. And so that's the stout. The one you're drinking was the first release. It was in the barrel for 3.5 years in French oak. And we distilled that in 2011.
So as we get into the second part of our interview here, we always transition into talking about the distiller's favorite movie. We try to marry this concept of film and whiskey. And Marko reached out to us and said that his favorite film is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. I'm really excited to talk about this. I know Brad is not a huge fan of horror films, but I was literally just talking about The Shining with somebody the other day. And Marko, as we get into the third sample that you have for us here, which is the R5, I'm going to kind of sip on this as we talk about The Shining, but tell us what it is about this movie that has really stuck with you all these years.
Well, I was a kid in the 80s, And I believe this came out in like 80, what was it, 83, 84?
I think it was 1980, actually. Yeah. So it was like right at the beginning of the decade.
1980. Yeah, that would make more sense. Like right around 80. We lived, my parents bought like 17 acres up on top of Spring Mountain in 72. And so we lived in this cabin overlooking Napa Valley, like way on top of Spring Mountain. And I was sick. I think I had cold or flu or something. And so there was a family party that was at a friend's house. And so I stayed at home, and it was dark out, it was raining, it was cold out, and the wind's blowing from the north. And I'm sitting there, I'm watching The Shining as a kid, because I'm like 8 years old or 9 years old or something like that. Let's see, in 80, I was 7. All of a sudden, our power went out at our house, and I'm in the middle of The Shining, and power goes out in my house, just blackout, raining out, dumping rain. I'm up on top of the hill. I'm by myself. I'm like, oh my God. It was nuts. The power came back on, TV kind of turned back on again finally and stuff. And then I continued to watch the movie, and that just kind of set the pace for the rest of the whole movie for me. And I was just freaked out, and but in a good, solid way. And ever since then, I just love it. I mean, the lines that come out of that movie, I mean, it's classic to me.
I mean, and you've got Jack Nicholson going full Jack. Like we just did One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest a few weeks ago on the podcast. And, we were talking about Jack going full Jack there. But, man, he takes it to the next level in The Shining.
Yeah.
Well, and talking about taking it to the next level, I've been sipping on this clear whiskey that you sent us, and I'm really curious, man. This is some powerful stuff. What's going on here, Marko?
Oh, right on. Yeah, that's a special brew. It's a double hopped IPA, so it's double IPA. But then we enzymatically broke it down a little bit more. So that means we took the non-fermentable sugars and broke them down into fermentable sugar, and then fermented it again and completely dried it out, and then added some hops, top note hops, dry hopped it afterwards. So it's a double hop, double fermented, double dry hopped IPA. I mean, it's just crazy. And then we distilled that, and the floral and fruitiness notes really explode out of that. I have some in a tank that I'm aging as clear eau de vie style, and then I have the second half of it in 500-liter pungent barrels, 132-gallon barrels, French oak, that were in the wine industry. And so by using bigger barrels and by using, badass 500-liter French oak big barrels, you get a lot less barrel influence, which is perfect for me because I want to show off the whiskey in the barrel and not the damn barrel. So that program for me is going to be fabulous. And I'm also going to release some of it the way you're trying it as well. I might cut it maybe down to like 120 proof or something like that, and or maybe 132 is my favorite, and bottle it as a clear whiskey.
Well, we have to say, I mean, honestly, I don't know if we've encountered a distillery that has so much kind of, ingenuity behind it. Like it's such an interesting concept. I'm really shocked that there's not more of this in the market already, because it just kind of makes so much sense to distill beer into whiskey. And like I said, you have done such a fantastic job of marrying those flavors together with the final product. I want to ask before we let you go, what does your current distribution look like? Where can we find you? And then also, any plugs you want to give for upcoming products?
Well, thank you. We have no investors, no loans. We own all our own equipment, and we're making a living. That's just how we've evolved, through the 37 years we've been in business now. And so we have distribution, charbay.com, our website. We have stores around the US that can ship as well. but we like to direct people there. We can't sell retail direct in California, which is, we don't need to get into that.
Right.
It's just all kinds of wrong. I mean, you can go buy a pound of weed at a store now here, but you can't even come over to my distillery and buy a single bottle of vodka.
Wow.
It's messed up and financially frustrating for me. But I think what's going to happen is other distilleries want to ship into California, and the majority of all the distilleries are going to lobby the state of California. And then being able to ship into California, other distilleries can ship into California. And if they can ship into California, then we can ship to California. And then we can be able to ship back to other states as well. And then eventually we'll be able to sell our own bottles retail direct. And that would be badass, because then it's like, hey, you want a bottle of that barrel?
Right.
Just let me sell my own product. you know?
Absolutely.
I love my distributors. We need our distributors. We need 3-tier distribution, no doubt. And I need to be able to sell my own product too.
For sure.
So right now, all we can do is we can talk about charbay.com, and we're happy to get emails and help people find our products.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have so enjoyed having this lineup that you sent us, and we hope to have you back on the podcast again sometime in the future. Hopefully the next time we talk to you, we will hear a good report out of the California legislature about you being able to sell your own product here.
Oh, man, I hope it's next week, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been Marko Karakasevic. Thank you so much for sitting down with us. We appreciate it, Marko.
Absolutely. You guys have a great day and enjoy those spirits. And, if you can mix those into cocktails as well.
Oh, they will get their full usage, believe us.
We always go on a Santa Claus Christmas train ride with the skunk train here in Mendocino County, and we always bring the stout because they serve hot chocolate on the train.
Oh man!
And the malt flavors from the roasted and toasted barley malts from the stout really makes that train ride with 12,000 kids screaming, running up and down the train that much more fun.
I'm sure it does. All right, for the Film and Whiskey Podcast, I am Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
We'll see you next time.